Consul and audience members, your very presence and the very possibility that an award like this could be made tells me that it takes a village. And the village started, I don't know when the first Hammurabi text was translated into something other than Assyrian, I don't know. But it's a long, long cultural village, east and west. It's a gigantic, enormous village, which in my mind encompasses dear friends, many of whom are professional colleagues, with many of whom I have wonderful relationships. It is unthinkable, and I believe that this is what the Herr Consul said about translation, it is unthinkable to imagine any culture without translation, and that is a communal endeavor. As I was listening to those wonderful plaudits, I was reminded of a famous personality of yore. Many will not recognize the name Jimmy Durante, a comedian from years ago. But when all those instances were being cited, I thought of one of his taglines, "I got a million of them." And I listened and I thought, I think I remember doing that, I'm not sure. But I wanted to offer a few remarks because when I first talked about having something to say, the colleagues at the Goethe-Institut said, well, I think people are very interested in finding out what goes into a process of translation and so on. And now I'm going to ask Dean if you will be so good as to do this when my time is up, okay? I might not pay any attention, but do it anyway. I proceed from two questions, one of which was asked years ago when I was doing a reading in Vienna. And in the Q&A, a woman raised her hand. She said, "Herr Professor, are you a masochist?" And I thought, well, I don't think I can answer that. And then just last week, I was talking with a friend who doesn't know one thing about translation, and this goes back again to the Herr Consul's remarks. He said, "What is it that you can do that a machine can't do?" And I gave him a number of instances, and certainly you've heard many, many instances, a rich array of quotations from the translation, which I think amply demonstrate that no machine, no computer could possibly do what a human is who's alert to the wordplay, who's alert to the meters, who's alert to the rhythms, and so on. Now, I was thinking about my late sister, God rest her, because she said to me once in times of great personal family stress, she said, "Vince, I think I could write a book, but I can't really start because I wouldn't know how to spell the title." And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "The title is..." And although I kept a diary, and it's been actually read by people, I think I could write a book too, but I also can't spell the title if the book is about translation and what you do with it, because the title would be... Everything is ad hoc, which will lead to my point that I don't even think there's such a thing possible as translation theory, but I do not mean to irritate people when I say that. If translation theory is a thing, and I don't think it is, I really don't. I'll quote David Bellos in a minute about that. It doesn't have anything to do with what an actual translator does, as far as I know. So I thought that I might offer another couple of comments, and they would start with an observation by Francine Prose. She wrote a wonderful, I'm so grateful for the review that she wrote in the New York Review of Books. She wrote a wonderful review, and in an entirely different context, she wrote the following: "Translation demands minimal reduction of depth, resonance, harmony, plus all the less quantifiable marks of artistic creation." Well, there's right there, a computer can't do that. She has these wonderful words, especially true of stories in which the plot line is not so clear, so succinct, so distilled. and of writers who achieve their effects almost entirely by the use of tone, which the previous statements indicated, by the accretion of minute detail, and by the precise use of language. And that is Doderer to the max. And I will quote David Bellos because I need support when I say this. I am not one to stir up controversy, but he wrote, well, first of all, he's a magnificent translator and scholar. His biography alone of Georges Perec and then his translations of Perec are simply wonderful. He wrote a book called Is That a Fish in Your Ear? And he says, translation isn't the name of a long-established academic discipline. How can you have theories and principles about a process that comes up with no determinate results? And I think that's one of the most astute things that's been said about translation. I think of translation, this has something to it, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't, as a kind of exercise like that of a musician following a score or musicians following a score. And I'm thinking in particular of two pieces of music which sound entirely different every time they're played. One is the piano version, Ravel Le Tombeau de Couperin, and the other is that magnificent wind quintet by Samuel Barber of Summer Music, and they sound very much almost like different works every time they're played. And I think that's what Bellos might mean about no determinate results. And yet, whoever plays Le Tombeau de Couperin or Summer Music is working with the same notes. But perhaps the ensemble or the soloist says, well, you know, I think the bass note needs to be brought out a little bit more. I think that the staccato is not staccato enough. Forte doesn't mean bang the piano to loud. It means strong, not loud. So to me, if I have any principle, it starts with, what do we hear? What do we hear? Not what is the lexical meaning necessarily. Of course, that can't be ignored, but what do we hear? Shelley and I were at a wonderful small conference years ago where John E. Woods gave a talk on his translation of Arno Schmidt, and we were flabbergasted. By the time he was 15 minutes into it, I had migraine headache number 10 because it was so daunting and so challenging, all those neologisms and word plays and games. And what he said at that conference was that every morning he gets up fresh and reads out loud what he did the day before. And if he stumbles in the slightest, there's something wrong. I also am thinking of the preface by Seamus Heaney to his translation of Beowulf. And he said it took him a long, long time to find the music. But then he found the music in his Irish relatives, his father and his uncles, who would just sit around telling stories. And realizing that Beowulf is a story, he began to get some of the rhythms. In other words, what do we hear? So the sound comes first, I think, over and above the lexical, but the sound of what? Now, I wish we had a room of 4-year-olds here, because they would be the very best critics. Spiegel, Spiegel an der Wand, wer ist die Schönste im ganzen Land? Now I'm going to give you an accurate translation. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the most beautiful one in the whole country? And I think those 4-year-olds would run me right out to the street, very upset, and justly so, because the real translation has been missed. Mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? It's an incantation, it's a magic formulation, it's a rhyme. And more than the actual meaning of the words, it's the rhyme that carries, I think. I will digress. I'm famous for that. I read oftentimes statements by, I suppose, well-meaning translators saying that rhyme is no longer suitable for the 21st century, and poetic practice really precludes it these days, and it cannot be attained any longer. Well, if I were with my homies, I would just say I'm calling BS. That is, it's just not so. They forgot to tell Richard Wilbur that when he made his magnificent translations of the Molière plays, which, by the way, have just been published by Library of America, and I would have bounced a check to get the 2 volumes. They didn't tell that to Marie Boroff when she did her great translation of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. They didn't tell that to Anthea Bell when she translated Goethe. And I'm going to read you a Goethe poem. Hello there, patron. This is his poem from the West Eastern Divan called Ginkgo biloba, the two-pronged leaf of the ginkgo tree. This contains, to me, everything a translation should have. The ginkgo, that eastern tree in my garden plot now grows. In its leaf there seems to be a secret the wise man knows. Is that leaf one and lonely? In itself in two divided? Is it two that have decided to be seen as one leaf only? To such questions I reply, do not my love songs say to you, should you ever wonder why I sing, that I am one but two? I think everything a translation could be is in that wonderful translation. And I see that there are translations of rhymed poems not in rhyme. You might know that the very first translation of the Shakespeare sonnets into German were in prose. Well, what the hell happened to the sonnets is what I want to know. But I have a little bit of a bug about that. And if you ask me nicely during the reception, I'll tell you who's my greatest villain is. And if I had a voodoo doll, I would ply it every day for destroying translation. So I think that rhyme is important and must be observed. I think word games and wordplay must be observed. And I'm going to read you a very short passage where Doderer, I think, just decided to, I don't know what he was drinking, but I think he decided to just have at it. And I wasn't drinking anything, but it was tempting. We're meeting a character called Thea Rokitzer. And people think she's stupid, but she's naive, which is something very different. Thea Rokitzer was much more than stupid. The argument could be made also, though, that she was very far from stupid, despite what people said. She was missing two traits needed to attain stupidity as our age recognizes it. They were brazenness and hostility, neither the faintest trace of which was evident in her face or her person. Okay, here we go. One might accordingly call her callow. Very well. Call callow shallow, but though soft as a mallow, it's not fallow. No, it's a bud that rose when the spring sun's warmth grows and falls low on the callow in the hollow while the cow lows. A bud not just in the physical sense. A bud was what Thea was in the highest degree, and the roses in the garden had instantly made her their focal point. The rose was slow to blow in that one furrow unfallow. Her callow being would show, for her it was really a slow go, but then she would so glow rather than a no-go, and there was more to her than you know. I'm not making this up. I guess maybe I am because I translated it. But that was a floor walker and a nail biter, and in good Viennese I said to myself several times, auf was habe ich mich eingelassen? What in the hell did I let myself in for? I think, and I will make two more points about what do I hear. There is congruence between the length and pace of a sentence and what the sentence is about. And again, I'm thinking of someone I won't name who said, well, English just does not allow long sentences. You cannot take these long German sentences and reproduce them in any way in English. You have to break them up. No. And again, like, well, what do you mean? That's not what the sentence said. That's not what it's doing. And there is an instance that I don't know that we have time for, where, and in fact, John quoted part of it, the description of the Strudlhof Steps and the cascading and so on, it's one sentence that goes on for several pages, and to break that up would be to just demolish part of the steps. When I was translating Goethe a number of years ago, well, that was another hair raiser. He has a kind of rhapsody about his home city, Klagenfurt, and a fantasy about a person getting into a boat on the Lend Canal in the city and going out to the river and going out to the lake and going out to the ocean. And it's unending. You could not in my conscience, break up that sentence. But of course, the trick is so daunting because, as some who may not know German know, things don't fall in the same order. A very simple example, if I said to you, I went yesterday to the movies, you'd say, okay, wait, is English your first language? Well, what do you mean? You mean you went to the movies yesterday, not you went yesterday to the movies. Now you take that time and place order, and you multiply it by 150 clauses and subclauses and parodies of bureaucratic language, and I just would sit at a screen and want to scream. But I didn't have enough energy to do that. Because it took everything just to endure, I guess. I don't want to sound like a Faulkner character, but it's tough stuff. Finally, one has to be attentive to the poetic lyrical elements. And I think I would like to close by reading the opening of part 4 of the Strudlhof Steps. It's virtuosic. We were talking before about there's a Wagnerian element about this, constant repetition of leitmotifs. There's a kind of a symphonic-Wagnerian element. Part 4 recapitulates strongly the opening of part 1 down to extremely enormous details, or extremely important details, but minute ones. And you can be excused if you don't remember on page 560 what was said on page 3. We'll let that slide. But we're having a description now of Mary's apartment in Vienna, and she is still away for the summer. And it recapitulates a great deal of the action. John said something about it's like Stifter for the 21st century, and most people either love or don't love Adalbert Stifter. I do. But here is a description that I would like to read, page and a half. Golden domes of late summer vaulted over the city and its wide-reaching districts. Not yet Indian summer, autumn had as yet given no sign of itself. The air was so utterly calm that if someone had pictured the gently hovering gondola of a hot air balloon more or less directly above the Strudlhof Steps, it would have remained aloft at the same spot for hours without drifting away across the river and the long slopes of the Bisamberg, its checkerboard of meadows, fields, and forest not yet showing any change of color. Dwelling places were very quiet. Those deserted and locked at the moment now were looking open. Every shimmering object left alone dreams of distances, and especially where the windows present a more intriguing view of the substantial cityscape, the sheen reflected off a solitary music stand, or an abandoned piano seems intimately molten and fused with the gleam lying far-flung and fleeting on unknown roofs. It was very quiet in Frau Mary's apartment as well. Nothing had changed here since the death of her husband, Oscar, in February 1924, we will recall. The long suite of rooms was still laid out as it had been earlier. The furniture was still standing where it had been standing earlier. When Marie, the faithful and always cheerful maid, wasn't officiating in the kitchen and quiet reigned there, gleaming quiet, for the kitchen lay on the sunny side of the apartment and all the pots and pans sparkled in silent but powerful testimony to domestic virtue, when, in other words, the quiet compacted itself around all the objects standing and lying in the kitchen, there was never heard the clock-like regularity of dripping from a faucet not altogether tightly sealed. It was tight. This noise-making mouth was firmly closed. Passing time also detectably broke in on the forever sunless rooms to the front, more noiseless than clocks, almost as soundless as a sunbeam wandering between the closed piano, deeply reflecting its furniture-like stillness, and the polished music stand, making them gleam, linger in full resplendence, and then once more pale and fade. Almost as noiseless was the threading of the taxis like beads being strung as they occasionally crossed the roadway at the end of the street just below that led straight to the Danube Canal. It stayed unwaveringly empty and still. The wide canal opened up the prospect. The trees on the opposite bank were still green, and not far away stretched the Augarten with its tennis courts, the pale facade of the palace seeming to recede, mother of pearl, inside a shell. Doderer said that his ultimate ambition would be to write what he called a roman muet, a silent novel, that is, one that completely dispensed with plot. And he was obviously, I think obviously, following Mallarmé, who dreamed of writing an œuvre sur rien, a work about nothing. But in this nothing is a something to me of immense power. But as Francine Prose put it, it's the lyricism, it's the pacing, it's the timing, it's the thematic relevance to the psychology of the characters that counts. Would I do it all over again? Well, I will answer the question whether I'm a masochist or not. My publisher is here. I am so enormously grateful, Edwin, that you asked me to do this. And I just asked him, what do you got for me next? So you got your answer to that. Thank you very much.